give it another minute or two and then we'll get started.
Sure.
All right, well, happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to another meeting. I'm Gabby.
Hi, everyone. I'm Justin. We're so happy to have you here and so happy to have CSUN Internal Audit.
Yes, before we get started, we do have a few announcements for the week. So tomorrow, Tuesday the 30th, we have Surgent presenting from 5 to 6 on the topic of accounting career options and credentials. Join us for a fun session of bingo this Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m. And in case you've missed any of our past meetings, you can find them on our YouTube page at CSUN and follow us on Instagram for regular updates.
Today, we have Howard from CSUN Internal Audit presenting on external versus internal audit.
And as always, we encourage everyone to have their cameras on, and please wait until the end to ask questions and use the raise hand feature on Zoom. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Howard from Internal Audit.
Thank you very much, Gabby and Justin. It's a pleasure to be asked again to speak to your group. As you mentioned, the topic is internal audit versus external audit. So most of you in your courses, you get very familiar with external audit is, and maybe there might be a paragraph or two in your textbooks about what internal audit is. But actually, it's a very vibrant career for business majors or accounting majors. And many students have gone on to careers in internal audit. So here's what we're going to talk about today. Here's my agenda for our time together. A little bit about me, some background on internal audit. We're going to discuss risk and internal controls, because without understanding those topics, you really won't get an idea of what internal audit really means. Then we'll talk about the differences between internal audit and external audit. Then the CIA exam, or Certified Internal Auditor exam, a professional designation for internal auditors. And also pay attention if you're interested in an internship coming up this summer and possibly into the fall. I'll talk about that. And I'm sure we'll have time for some questions and answers. Okay. So a little bit about me. I am a CSUN graduate in accounting many years ago. I don't put the year on there because it's so long ago. I've been here at CSUN about 20 years doing this position. Prior to that, I was with a company you might have heard of, PwC. So I have two certifications, one, the CIA, as it's called, and also the Certified Fraud Examiner, or CFE. Not going to be talking about the CFE, but you're free to contact me, or I'll tell you more about it, and you can look up that designation. Okay, so here we go. So the internal audit profession, not a lot of people know what it is, and hopefully by the end of our time together, you'll have a much better idea. But actually, it's one of the top 5 highest professions in demand around the world. So all listed companies, by listed, meaning that they are listed on the stock exchange, all listed companies have to have an internal audit function. So as a result, many organizations have continuing needs for internal auditors. So we'll talk more about that, what that means. So it can either be you're hired by that company, or as I did for part of my career, I worked for PwC, and PwC was hired to be the internal audit function at various companies. So the organizations that hire internal auditors, the good thing is they're paying higher entry-level salaries. There's a lot of challenging work. And the other thing, even probably more now during the lockdowns and so on, is that schedules are flexible. There's openings in public, private, and in government, and you can make good money. And the reason I have $6 there dollar signs is that you can make a six-figure salary in internal audit. So here's a sort of an academic definition of what internal audit is. If you take the CIA exam, you'd have to be familiar with the definition. So it's an independent, objective assurance and consulting activity that adds value and improves an organization's operations. Okay, that's a lot of jargon and a lot of vocabulary to process there. But as we go along the presentation, you'll get a better idea. So it helps an organization accomplish its objectives by bringing an approach that's systematic and disciplined to evaluate and look at the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes in a company. So what do internal auditors do? So there's a common misconception when you hear the word auditor and then you hear the word internal auditor, you might think that has something to do with accounting and finances primarily. Well, that's not the case. So good part of my time and good part of many internal auditors' time is not focused on accounting and finances. So auditors can look at every aspect of an organization. So looking at policies, procedures, processes, confirming accuracy. And the interesting part of the job comes from after you do analysis, then you make recommendations to improve things or try to establish internal controls, which we'll talk more about. And once you make those recommendations that everyone agrees to, then a big part of the job is to follow up to ensure that the corrective actions or the improvements are implemented. So there's internal audit work in all kinds of companies. So various functions. It's on the left side, a typical company, not a university, would have functions that would be audited, such as purchasing, cash controls, manufacturing, payroll, collections, etc. Now, a university has almost all of those same areas that need to be audited as well. But in addition, a university has some unique things that need to be looked at, like admissions, grade reporting, housing, dorms, fundraising. And if you've been on campus any part of your college career, you see there's almost always some kind of construction project going on. And another area that's unique to university is athletics. So to better understand what internal audit is, it's important that we talk about risk and internal control. So one definition of risk, you've all heard the term, but to put in a sort of a definitional way to get a handle on it, it's any issue that can prevent an organization from achieving its objectives. And to manage risk, we have to understand the importance of internal control. Okay, don't worry, we're going to define that too. So what are internal controls? So they're steps taken to obtain reasonable assurance that objectives are carried out, that they're achieved. Now, why are internal controls important? So you want to have good internal controls in place to provide for accountability, effective and efficient operations, manage reporting, compliance with laws and regulations, and protection of assets, including reputation. That's a big one. So I'm sure a lot of you have had various jobs, could either be in accounting already, or maybe you had a job in retail or food service, something like that. But all these jobs do have internal controls, but as you were doing them, you may not be aware that these various policies and procedures and practices were internal controls. So all this that we've talked about does sound a little technical. So let's try to look at it from a layman's point of view. So internal control is simplified. It's mechanisms that are in place to prevent errors from entering the process or detecting errors once they've occurred. And another definition that I like is the things that we rely on to make sure things don't get goofed up. right? That we don't have big problems. All right, so that's fine. It's all academic and a lot of vocabulary, but think about remember those days when you used to come to campus, or maybe you haven't come to campus yet, but when you do go someplace, when you leave your home, what do? Do you lock the doors to your home? Well, that's an internal control. And what are we trying to reduce the risk of? That someone's going to come into your home, that you don't, some unauthorized entry, to put it in business terms. What about the PIN for your ATM card? Right? Do you keep it confidential in a safe place, or do you share it with your friends? Right? What about your checking account or your bank account? Do you reconcile it every month? Probably not. Would be my guess if I saw a show of hands, as when we used to do this in person. But what about your debit card or your credit card? Do you compare your statement with your receipts? So these would all be internal controls that you would implement for yourself. So let's delve a little bit deeper into internal controls that you implement in your own life on probably a daily basis. So let's look at our objective. So internal controls, there's really two aspects to internal controls. One, there's an objective, and then there's risks associated with meeting that objective. Okay, you'll get it as soon as we go through the examples. So our objective pre-pandemic is getting to campus. But what about the risks? What are the risks in coming to campus? So when we do this live, I'd get a lot of people shouting out things, but so these are some of the things that we've come up with when I've made this presentation over the years to your fellow students. So one risk is traffic, right? Another, parking. Okay, so getting the idea. So all these things would prevent you from getting where you need to go. So if we use the school analogy, getting to class, all these things could prevent you from getting to school, maybe not completely, but maybe not on time, right? Okay, so there's all these risks. Now, what can you do to mitigate these risks, right? These would be the internal controls that you implement for yourself. Okay, so what internal controls would we implement for ourselves? Well, let's take a look. Some of the prior answers over the years. Okay, so listen to traffic reports, or you can look at Wave or things like that. Use an alarm clock. Arrive early. So all these things that you do, but you don't think of them as internal controls, but that's what they actually are. Check your tires, check your gas gauge, all those things would be examples of personal internal controls. And as we're talking about this, you can probably think of internal controls that would apply in a business setting, in financial and non-financial work. Okay, so as I talked about a little bit, many of you may have had some entry-level job in retail or food service. So some of the internal controls associated with these types of jobs usually get some kind of training or orientation, whether it's on the job or there's a little class or someone, or you shadow someone when you start. And there might be some written policies and procedures, some kind of a handbook, some kind of sheet of things that you have to do, the same way every time. Another big internal control is separation of duties, where you want to separate the people receiving cash, accounting for cash, and reconciling. If you worked in retail, you know that there's cash drawer counts that periodically and definitely at the end of the workday. So here's an example that I like to share with you about how internal audit and internal controls don't necessarily have anything to do with finances. So this is a real case about students reported that their final grades were not what they received. And how could this possibly happen? You might want to ponder that for just a second, but it really did happen. And as it turned out, the students who changed the grades, they were caught eventually. So how did this happen? Well, think about maybe a professor or two that you've had in your, or teacher or instructor that was very open about their own life and where they grew up and what kind of pet they have and where they went to school when they grew up, that type of thing. So maybe some of you are already ahead of me, but think about your password. Let's say you forgot your password, but you have a security question that you need to answer. Okay, so these students who perpetrated this grade reporting fraud or unauthorized changes, they tried to sign in as the professor with the professor's ID. So the ID is very simple in many environments, right? It might be the first initial, last name, or first name, last name, separated by a period. So that's fairly easy to figure out someone's ID. But what about the password? So they put down something and they said, they got the message, did you forget your password? So please click here, please answer the security question. So the security question was, what high school did you go to? So the students knew the answer. So they changed the password. And then once they got in the system, they changed their grades. So that probably would have been fine and nothing would have happened, except they changed the grades of some other students. And those other students became sort of the control factor, and they notified the professor and said, this is not the grade that I expected. So upon looking further into this, they saw that there was a change. The professor was not able to enter her account by herself. And so there was a lockout. So it created a whole issue, and those eventually we were able to track down what computer was used and where it was used and the individuals who made those changes. So how does this relate to internal controls? Well, think about that password. Think about the change in password, or if you forget your password. So if you forget your password, you might have to change it. So what happens after you change that password? You probably get an email that says, did you change your password? Or a text or something. And if not, please contact us immediately. So you might have seen that. I know it happens to me. Occasionally I might forget a password. So the internal control about that, receiving that message, did you change your password, or your password has been changed? That message wasn't in the system yet because this was quite a few years ago. And that internal control was not in place yet. So this is a good example of internal controls affecting a very important process, but it's not a financial process. Okay, so let's take a look at how internal audit compares to external audit. We'll spend a little more time on this, but just in broad terms, so we have two columns here, internal audit and external audit. So internal audit has a broader focus. We're looking at financials, we're looking at efficiency and effectiveness, objectives, compliance, safeguarding assets, that type of thing. And a fairly diverse skill set is required. You need to know, as an auditor, about a lot of different things. You might be assigned to audit something that you have no experience with, so you have to learn about it. And the other big part of the difference is that internal audit is part of an organization. So on the other hand, there's external audit, where the focus is on financial statements. And looking at, generally speaking, you're looking at historical data. What was in the account and what does it show now? So primarily the skills involved are accounting, And the other big part that's different, of course, is that it's independent from the organization. Okay, so here's a little more explanation about some of the differences. We're going to look at focus, standards, fraud, recommendations, and follow-up. Okay, so with internal audit, we look at a whole variety of things, or we can. So from the financial to the operational, assurance, consulting, IT, and fraud. So with external audit, the focus is attesting to the accuracy of the financial statements, that they accurately represent the finances of the company. There's also a review of internal controls, but the internal control review is limited to the controls over financial reporting. Whereas in internal audit, we look at internal controls over the entire organization. Okay, so internal audit and external audit both have to work following standards. So in the IIA, the Institute of Internal Auditors, they have professional standards. And external audit, there's the one you probably most heard about is GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. Okay, so sometimes in internal audit, we might be called on to investigate fraud. And also as part of that, we review fraud prevention and to make sure that there's ways to detect fraud or the possibility of fraud before it even happens. So with external audit, fraud isn't a focus, but they may be hired to investigate fraud, but as a separate engagement from the financial statement audit. So a big part of internal audit is once you analyze a process and you look at the controls or whether they're in place or they're not working effectively, you make recommendations for corrective action. The external audit also does some recommending, but it's a little different in that the financial statement audit, once it's done, the auditors leave and then they come back next year and make sure that everything's been corrected. The focus isn't on the corrective action. So the follow-up or the ensuring that the corrective action is done with internal audit, it's a big focus. You know, these are a list of things that we're focusing on. And with external audit, the focus is on the financial areas. So in summary, internal audit, you work for the company and you provide guidance. You're almost like an internal consultant. With external audit, you're a third party hired to provide an opinion on the financial statements. Okay, so another big difference with internal audit versus external audit is the work-life balance. You might have heard that term regarding careers. So with internal audit, generally speaking, your hours are much more predictable. You know, it's 8 to 5. You know when you're going to be there. The job is fairly regular. With external audit, you might have some very long hours during busy season. With internal audit, you're an employee of the company that you're auditing. With external audit, you're external to that company. So the way the audit work is done, there's usually some sort of an assessment or decision is made about what are the areas that we need to audit for this time period. With external audit and the audit of the financial statements, it's the regulatory deadlines that drive what happens and when. You're supposed to, particularly for the listed companies, you have to do the financial statement audits at certain required timeframes. With the work itself on a sort of day-to-day basis, with internal audits more project-based, right? But with external audits, it's very client-based because that's how you charge the client, right? If some of you worked at accounting firms or similar before, you're familiar with that concept. So with internal audit, you work, at the company's various locations. With external audit, you work at the various clients' sites. So within internal audit, there's a number of specialties. And one in particular, and you're welcome to have a copy of the presentation. I can email it to you, or your meeting directors can mail it to you, or email it to you. Some of the big other specialties within internal audit, probably the one that's the most lucrative is the information technology audit. And this is a clickable link here about the what's known as the CISA, or Certified Information Systems Auditor certification, where the focus is on auditing IT. And given that almost every company uses IT, every organization needs to have, any organization of substantial size is going to have an IT audit function. So there's a lot of jobs, and the entry-level jobs pay pretty well. And once you're established, can definitely get a good salary. Depending on your interest, or what's something that might you find interesting, there's auditors who are specialized in healthcare or banking or gaming and hospitality. A lot of auditors in Las Vegas, and of course the government has quite a few auditors. Okay, so the certification that I have, one of them is the Certified Internal Auditor designation, CIA. So you generally do need a bachelor's degree, a reference from an individual, qualified individual, meaning someone else who's a CIA, and you have to have at least 2 years of internal audit experience, pass the exam. And what's a nice thing about the CIA exam compared to the CPA exam, you can take the exam before you graduate. So you can get started right away. Once you get it, you're required to maintain your knowledge and skills and stay up to date with continuing education. So here's a little bit more about the CIA exam. So it comes in 3 parts, and the first part covers these areas. The second part, more about internal audit. The third part is not really about internal audit at all. A lot of it has to do, covers topics that you study throughout your business education, about IT, financial management. So a lot of you could probably pass part 3 after you complete your undergraduate business courses. So it's very relevant, to those courses, to these types of questions that are on part 3. Okay, so this brings us to an important topic. For many years, I've had a number of interns, and 32 in the last 18 years. So the interns helped me with a number of things, including working on audit reports, work papers, obtaining supporting documentation, reviewing for compliance, investigating things, and doing research on various topics so we can understand what we're reviewing. So some of the benefits of the internship for many of the students, it helps to improve your writing and communication skills, because one of the finished products of an audit is a written report. So writing and having good communication skills, both on paper and in person, is very important. We also use the Microsoft suite of products. So we use Excel, Word, PowerPoint. Another nice handy thing is the hours are fairly flexible. Given our current environment, a lot of flexibility, and I'm not even on campus very much anymore. So I do have an opening for an internal audit intern, and a number of you have already contacted me. There's a flyer that I think has been communicated to all of you. So please let me know if you're interested. The deadline to apply is April 30th, and then at the beginning of May, I'll be conducting interviews. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
If you have a question, feel free to use the raise hand button on the bottom of your Zoom screen.
I believe Colin raised his hand first.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I found it very interesting. Is there internal audit stuff for people interested in, say, government accounting or other fields, or is it mostly industry based?
Oh, no, there's quite a few auditors in the government. You might have heard of the Government Accountability Office, the federal agency. There's hundreds and hundreds of people doing internal audit type work. So it's very big in the government. So look up GAO.
Thank you very much.
Sure, absolutely.
Christopher?
Yes.
Earlier in the presentation, you said that an internal audit requires like a diverse skill set. How would someone go about achieving this diverse skill set?
Well, one of the things is to be interested in a lot of things. So you're working for a company and you're interested in what they do and how they make it. It's a quality would be curiosity about how things work and how things get better. So is there a class on how to do that? It's sort of a personality trait, I would say. But in terms of actual skills, you should be familiar with accounting and economics and business generally, and then also some, personal relations type things, because it's ultimately people who do a lot of the who implement the internal controls. So when I talk about diverse skill sets, so it's all those things together. Things people look for in CPA candidates, it's similar in the CIA realm as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Colin, do you still have a question?
No, I'll lower my hand.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? Everyone, you can use the raise hand. Dylan?
Hi, Mr. Lutwak.
Right.
I have a question about, I'm interested also is, for most students completing the internship program, are they still connected with the alumni network, or is there any communications engagement process that's ongoing?
I'm not sure what you mean specifically.
So upon completing the program, is there any trending kind of types of lines of career goals or objectives?
Well, I keep track of all the interns that I've had over the years, and the ones that I've been able to keep track of, all of them are gainfully employed, either in accounting firms or they're working in internal audit. In some of our tax auditors. One student, he was working for a CPA firm. Recently, he was the subject of a podcast about his career growth. So I've been in touch with many of them. And the thing that I wanted to point out is that, it sounds a little self-serving, but they found the experience to be really good in that they've learned a lot about business, about working in a real environment. And they've been able to take that information when they get interviewed for another job, said, can you give me an example of internal controls? Can you give me an example of how you reviewed something, or you analyzed something, or you researched something? So these things happen as part of the internship. I can't guarantee every aspect of internal audit happens in every internship, like fraud investigation, for example. But to get to the point of your question, I do keep in touch with the students. The benefit of the internship is that they have some real world experience in the audit field, which is really hard to get for most business students. I wish I'd had that when I was a student. So I'm trying to think of it, had I been a student, if I'm a student now, what would be beneficial, So the students do help me quite a bit in the work, but they also tend to find it helps them in their career.
That was very well said. Thank you.
Mhm. All right, so I deliberately tried to keep it presentation brief because I know some of you have to go on to another class or Zoom meeting or something right at 1 o'clock. So I was mindful of that. So any other questions for now? So if you'd like a copy of the presentation, I think, Gabby, can you send that to everyone if they request it?
Yes, of course.
Okay, great. All right.
I just have one last question for you. What point did you know you wanted to go into internal audit?
Probably fairly early in my career. I had a part-time job at a financial institution near the campus. So I was working near the campus and going to school. And they had an opening in their internal audit department, and I applied and got the job, and I seemed to like it. And then one of the nice little benefits about internal audit at that time was there was travel all over the state. So I got to see quite a bit of the California, and all of my expenses were paid for. So I enjoyed that part. But one of the things that I liked in particular about auditing and the process of auditing and the sort of the final product is I enjoyed writing, the research papers that you have to do in some of your classes. I like those things where you write up what you find and then you write up what you could do to improve. So I enjoyed that process. I enjoyed writing and communicating what I found and what could be better. So fairly early on, after I graduated, I realized that this was probably a good profession for me, that it sort of aligned with my interests and my abilities. So good question.
Got it. And when you are working with like clients, I know people in general are pretty hesitant to implement changes. How do
Right.
you go about selling the value of a change to them?
Well, there's a couple of ways. One is that generally speaking, the people that I'm auditing or the department, they have an area above them that's their supervisor or they're in charge of that area. So everyone has to be in alignment or in agreement with what the changes are. So let's take the grade reporting issue, okay? So there was obviously a flaw in the system. So it wasn't that hard to make sure that everyone agreed that having a verification of the grade of the password change was an important control. So once you see the value that you're reducing the risk of something, that people get to be on board with the changes. Sometimes people think, oh no, it's just another process or it's more bureaucracy. And you have to sort of explain things from a risk standpoint. Once people understand the risk standpoint, they tend to be more on board with the changes.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I also had another question for you, Howard. You mentioned you worked at PwC before moving to CSUN. What
Yes.
motivated you to return back to campus?
Good question. Well, with PwC, I was at that point in my life, I was getting a little tired of traveling constantly. So with PwC, I was traveling and driving and going all over the place. So I noticed, and one of my major clients was another university while I was at PwC. So I developed this sort of expertise in auditing a university. So there was an opening at CSUN, and I applied and got the position, obviously. And that was sort of the motivation. So I could work on something that I liked, have the connection with the university, and reduce my travel because at that time I had a new baby at home. So I didn't want to be away from home so much with PwC. So it was I was working in internal audit for PwC, auditing doing internal audit work for a number of companies as an outsource engagement. But that involved a lot of travel. So a big part of the decision was the big decrease in traveling from PwC. So not that there's nothing wrong with PwC, because you meet a lot of really smart people because they're very selective in who they hire. So that was good. So I took a lot of the information and experience I got from them, and I was able to apply it to this position and have a lot less travel. So it worked out. I've been here for 20 years now. So
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
For the students interested in your internship, what are some skills you recommend they brush up on?
Well, let's see. So I think they should have an understanding of business processes. They can think about what business processes they had in the jobs that they've had in the past, or the jobs that they might have currently, and be able to explain, the ability to explain how something works and what the control points might be. So when I talk to people about the position and they come in for an interview, I talk to them about their experience and what internal controls they've noticed in their own job. So some familiarity with internal controls would be very helpful. But I don't expect people who I hire to be any kind of an expert. You don't have to be a whiz in accounting, but someone who's has an interest in a lot of things and doing reasonably well in school. I'm not looking for, I don't make my decision based on your GPA. Let's put it that way. Okay. It's not the only factor.
Thank you for that. That's
Sure.
very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I have one question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you please tell me more about CIA exam? I'm not familiar with it, and our professors and even our audit professor have not ever mentioned about CIA exam. And how can we complete it before we graduate? Is it online?
Yes. Go to the the website is actually spelled out the word the IIA THEIIA.org, I believe. So it stands for the Institute of Internal Auditors. If you Google that, you'll find lots of information about. If you don't get to their site directly, you will through Google. But it's the Institute of Internal Auditors, and they're the ones that administer the test.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Howard, I did have another question for you. You said you've been at CSUN for 20 years. How is the growth in a career at an academic institution for students who might be considering going that route?
It's not huge, but there are some paths that other auditors have pursued, and that's to be the controller or the head of finance or head of a financial department within the university. So there are some internal auditors I know of at other Cal State campuses. They've gone that route. So they've been internal auditor, and then they've moved on to be a director of finance or budget director or various jobs like that.
And also, I have a question about the CISA exam, CISA. So,
Yeah.
it's actually, as someone who's actually majoring in accounting information systems, so would you say like information systems students should take that too? Like a lot of it, the technology part of things. How do you really ultimately, how do you see these the IS and accounting disciplines come together, and how does that exam help?
Right. So every firm that does financial statement audits, part of that audit involves IT, because you have to verify that the IT systems are working as they should be, because we rely on all the numbers that come in and come out, the input and the output for IT. So if someone has the CPA and CISA as well, they become a really sought after individual. So the salaries are really good in the IT audit. So you can work for IT audit, you can work for a CPA firm, or you can work for almost any other kind of company that has a substantial size that would have a audit department. So the CISA exam covers all the information systems controls and how to audit them. So as a student, you don't learn so much about the auditing part. You learn about how they work. So there's, of course, review materials for taking the exam. They're fairly plentiful. You can take live courses, or you can take online courses, or electronic materials. So it's not that, it's once you study, you should probably be able to pass, but it does take some studying to get familiar with the audit side of it. If you're really good at IT, a lot of it'll be, oh, I know that. But the auditing part makes it a little harder. But I definitely recommend it if that's an interest.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Howard, how has the pandemic affected the way your office is conducting internal audits?
Well, it makes it about 10,000 times harder. Because usually when you audit something, right, there's people in charge of it, and you have to talk to them. Not only you have to talk to them, but you have to see what they do. Okay, so it's sort of not quite seeing the whole process. We've had to adapt, auditors all over the country and auditors in education. We've had to adapt to getting everything electronically. It's not quite the same. Now, we've adapted and we've gotten used to looking at things only electronically, and that's fine, but it's still not quite the same. The hardest part is when we're having to do an investigation. So an investigation, you have to interview people who may not be telling the truth. So that's a lot harder to do over Zoom. Okay. In person, you can get more of the cues about they're not being truthful, or it's easier to present. You ask someone, did you buy this airplane ticket for your friend? And they'll say, no, I didn't do that. And then I hand them a piece of paper that shows that they did. So it's a little harder to do over Zoom, and that, it kind of confirms their false statements. So, it's not like fraud is rampant on the university, but, there's thousands of people here who work here, tens of thousands of students. So things do happen that we have to investigate. And investigating over Zoom is more challenging, but we still get the job done. So I've become a Zoom expert. And so in March of last year, I had to do an investigation, and it was so hard to figure out, especially the screen sharing part. So, do you see what I'm saying? No, I don't. And try it again. And so it was a little challenging at the beginning, but after about a year, so we're getting better at it. But I've had enough of the Zoom. I wouldn't mind going back to in person, but sometimes it's handy not being in person, because you can convene a meeting really quickly with a whole bunch of people, and nobody has, you can you don't have to reserve a conference room. Everybody's on Zoom. So it's a little better, but overall, I think the work experience is better in person. If I'm just writing a report and I don't need to deal with anybody, sure, I can do it at home. But there's distractions at home too. My dog might bark, or my wife will say, can you help me with this? Or, the doorbell will ring, it'll be a delivery. So, or the gardener comes. So all these things kind of interrupt the workday. So overall, probably what will happen with a lot of jobs is that you'll have an option of you can be in person part of the time, and part of the time you can work from home or work from wherever, right? Because once you have a device, you can work from any place, right? At Associated Students, Gabby, are you working in person or mostly online?
We are online, and some of us go in at least once a week. So
Uh-huh.
we've been kind of taking turns. I specifically go in on Fridays, someone else goes in on Monday. So we kind of take turns. And I think moving forward, from what I've been hearing as well, at least for the following fall, will also be hybrid, part at home and part online. So.
Mhm.
But yeah, a lot of our work has been paper-based, and we've moved everything onto Adobe Sign and a lot of new electronic platforms. So it definitely took a while to get used to, but I'm glad it kind of pushed us beyond just being so paper-based, kind of moved
Right.
us to the 21st century a little bit.
Right, exactly. So the good news is that almost everything I needed to look at, I had saved electronically, so just over the years. So when someone wanted to copy a report from 2015, I had it electronically. So I had developed that habit of everything was online in the network, not on a machine itself was always on the network. So I wouldn't have to rely on a particular machine. All right, well, thank you for all the great questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And maybe just a final question.
Mhm.
You have been at CSUN for 20 years. Would you like to share with us maybe your most memorable moment or something you're really proud of over the past 20 years?
Well, I got to say, one of the things that makes me the proudest is all the interns I've had and the success they've had in the field.
That's great.
Mhm.
Any more questions?
All right, well, thank you very much.
All right,
I'll
well,
hang
before
around for the
we,
group picture.
yes, before we say goodbye, let us do a quick group picture here. I believe you need to stop sharing your screen.
Right, no problem.
There we go. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
So I will count down. So please feel free to turn on your camera if you would like to be in the picture. So 3, 2, 1. Let me make sure it did it. One more. 3, 2, 1. There we go. Perfect.
All
Just
right.
do announcements.
Yeah, so announcements. Again, thank you, Howard. We really appreciate the insights you shared, and I'm sure our members will really take good use of it. So here are our announcements again, everyone. Tomorrow, Tuesday, the 30th, we have Surgeon presenting from 5 to 6, and the topic will be accounting career options and credentials. Join us for a fun session of bingo this Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m. And if you missed any of our past meetings, you can find them on our YouTube page at CSUN and follow us on Instagram for regular updates.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Howard, for a very informational meeting.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much,
very
Howard.
much.